welcome everyone to the Monday, March 14th meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. You see on the agenda review, besides our standard things of minutes, announcements, other business, and public comment, most of the work tonight is going to be on the town plan, the education chapter draft update, the energy draft chapter update, and then we're going to go over the outline of municipal facilities and services chapter. This is the work that we were going to do last time, and as you recall, we had an ice storm and other calamities last time, and so we didn't have a meeting. So it's been about a month. I missed everybody here. James, it's been 3 months or something. Welcome back. So the first item is to approve the minutes of February 14th, 2011.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just one typo that I noticed
Okay.
on the bottom of the second page, the last bullet point.
Streets, not sheets.
We're not doing complete sheets unless we're going to start a brand-new program here in Brattleboro.
It's a Bed Bath & Beyond thing.
Yeah, really.
I think we probably should start that. This is from the February 14th.
We'll make it a little interesting. But anyways,
Okay.
that's all.
Streets, not sheets.
Yeah, streets, not sheets.
Okay. Anything else? It was a good, I think a really good summary of
Yeah.
all the stuff we talked about, which was a lot. Everything I had written on my sheets was on this, so give my compliments to Julia, please. Or did Julia do it, or did you, Sue?
She does it from
Yeah.
notes and
Yeah.
tape where she needs to.
Yeah, she's got her name on the bottom.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are approved. The next item is announcements, and the first announcement is to welcome Liz McLaughlin to our group. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything about why you want to be here?
Put her on the spot the first time.
Well, first let me start by saying my name's spelled wrong.
Yeah, so I thought too.
No, I'm
It's
sorry.
it's MC capital L.
That's
There's
right.
No C, and it's correct on this little sheet that Sue just handed out. So let's go with that.
Okay.
And
I'm so sorry.
I'm a planner by profession, so I'm happy to be volunteering in my town. Well, I moved here 4 years ago from New Jersey, and I moved here because I like it here. So
All right.
it's a nice town, and I'm glad to be part of it.
What part of New Jersey?
Glen Ridge, which is near Montclair,
Bergen County?
Essex County. There are about as many people in Essex County as there are in the state of Vermont.
Right.
A couple of people at work are from around there. Or one person's wife is, and the other is from
Yeah,
Montclair, I think.
yeah.
So,
Well, it's a lovely area.
Yeah,
It breeds a lot of urban planners.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a
Lucky
great
us.
DVD over at the library in their section that you can check out it's called Green Builders, but it's all about New Jersey and Bergen County and one other county there and all the different things they're
Oh,
doing.
yes, I saw that on television.
Yeah, it was on TV, PBS, but the library has it, and it shows all kinds of interesting things that they're doing there, from energy things to schools. It's a great.
Yeah, I know a lot of those people. I was the founding president of the New Jersey Smart Growth Alliance, so I knew a lot about those
great.
people and projects. Most of it were PNC Bank branches and things like that. It was interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I recommend it to anybody, for our television viewing audience.
Well, welcome to the commission.
Thank you.
So the announcements about upcoming meetings. Is there a, did we,
It's not been
Uh,
revised
okay.
yet.
so just, we met last week, oops, and revised the schedule somewhat. You knew as soon as you got a schedule that it would be revised pretty quickly after that, right? No, there hasn't been a lot that has slipped, but the next meeting, March 28th, there'll be a presentation by BABB on the results of their plan, their planning process, I should say, and that will be sort of in the land use chapter category, really.
Who's doing the presentation? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
BABB,
Okay,
yeah,
so I thought you said, thank you.
yeah. And then the drafts that we will be reviewing will be transportation. And then I have land use written down, but I think we were basically just going to make a start on that, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. And then actually the next meeting after that, April 11th, we'll be looking at the outlines of the economic development chapter and the housing chapter.
No.
I don't know if we'll have outlines done, but we'll be discussing them.
Right.
Yeah, outlines,
Discussing
yes,
housing,
yes,
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So we're just moving ahead 1 month from the old schedule,
Well, sort of, yeah.
mostly? Huh?
Yeah. But, you know, beyond there was you know, we had left ourselves quite a bit of empty space, so, but we didn't go past April 11th. So we'll be beginning to talk about housing. Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah.
And then we'll be going over the draft of the municipal services chapter,
This is April 14th.
April 11th.
Oh, that's right, 11th, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then another announcement that's germane to all this is that March 31st will be the second meeting of the economic development. It'll be the second meeting that with our consultant about the commercial areas in town. So I think Jim and I were the ones from the commission that were at the last one, and Liz was too.
March 31st?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's-
so this will be the second one. and-
It's going to be Thursday. It's a Thursday night. It's going to be 6:30 at the Marlboro Graduate Center, 2 North.
Like last
is the
time,
room.
then.
Yeah, and he's going to be doing a kind of a review of the last meeting, a presentation of the market conditions, looking at it over the last 10 years, and then a kind of a discussion. It won't be breakouts or anything, but kind of a discussion of the material. So you plan on about an hour and a half.
Okay.
What's March 31st?
Yes, that's a Thursday.
And, you know, it'll be interesting to hear the Building a Better Brattleboro presentation and then sort of segue into that one. So I think it'll be interesting for us to hear the conclusions of one and then the process of the other, so.
Is that gonna be in, I'm sorry, is that gonna be an evening, it's gonna be an evening session?
Yeah,
6:30.
6:30 to 8 about, so.
Okay.
Hey, Maggie. So that's the review of what we've planned up to through the 11th of April, and then we'll go forward and probably get the I don't know when we'll plan the meetings after that, but just sort of pushed it up one meeting, so.
Is there a list somewhere of when all the meetings are scheduled?
Yes.
Yes, we can get that for you.
They're also on brattleboro.org.
Yes.
That's a good spot, thank you.
Which is where I always
Yeah.
go every Monday and figure out if I'm supposed to be here or not.
But-
It's-
Yeah,
We meet the second and the fourth Monday. of
Right.
the month.
I have to
Unless
write
it's-
them.
Unless it's canceled by weather, which is every
Otherwise, I totally forget.
second time. For a long
So
time.
what did you say was for next week's, next
Next
meeting?
time is the presentation by BABB,
and-
and then the transportation draft, and beginning discussion of the land use
Okay,
chapter.
so basically, from the schedule, tonight's agenda moved forward, basically.
Basically, with a few caveats.
But I wouldn't assume that for every meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. But so far, so good.
That's right.
Okay,
All right.
so, Sue or Rod, or do you want to talk about replacement pages for commissioner binders?
Sure. Before the meeting started, I passed out some handouts that you can use in your white binder, your white planning commissioner binder, to replace pages. We were putting one together for Liz and realized Jim still needed one, and then Julia found other pages that were
So that's this.
off. Yep.
Correct.
Yeah, and that was the changes we'd made last summer to the subdivision, is the changing planning commission to DRB and that.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Oh, okay, from all that work that we did.
yeah.
Okay. So this will replace the
Subdivision regs that are in
subdivision
that.
regs, and then this is the chart of uses.
Yep. And some of you might have the chart of uses, but, so,
And this
If you
is
have
up
it,
to
just-
date as of what we did
it was
last.
probably last
Yep.
summer.
So there's an old section in there that we can take out?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a substitution deal, you have to take that
Yes.
one out.
And everybody got a copy of the roster. Is that what we call it, roster?
Yeah.
Do you have the name spelled right?
Whatever it's called, roster.
All in
The
plastic,
direct,
too.
our little directory of the commission. Okay.
I have a couple things. Are we on announcements?
We're headed right straight for, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. Announcements.
There was I think most everybody got a notice for it. There was a talk by a man named Michael Schuman, who's does a lot of work around planning and rural growth and development. And there was a public presentation on last Wednesday night up in Putney, and then he had a meeting here for different planning commissioners and planning people, and I think people got invitations. But I have some information that he handed out there that I thought would be useful for everybody here on the commission, so I just picked up extras there for folks. Statistics around jobs. That was, I think Jimmy was there, Verrazino was there, and I think it was pretty good information. Yeah.
Okay,
You
good,
have one,
thank
but
you.
you want another one?
No, thank you.
I'll just pass it down. Maggie, do you want one? Or you got one, didn't you? Yeah.
Okay,
That's for folks who
Thanks.
weren't there. And then if you just, if you noticed on your way in tonight, on the bulletin board in the hallway, we have some info up that Maggie and I worked
We've
on.
got it.
We
Yeah,
just
that's
actually took some of the trifolds and the work that Sue in the planning office had put together, and we put together a bulletin board in the hallway here of information on the town plan, and there's also one a little different at the library
great.
for a few weeks, and then they sort of snuck us in because they have some other stuff going on, and so it'll come down maybe after another 10 days, but then they'll give us time later in the spring that puts more up about the town plan.
Great. Thank
So
you.
a little bit of, hopefully a little bit more public awareness for people who just come through this building or come through the library.
Okay, great. Did you have fun doing it?
We did.
Yeah, great paper, felt, any of that stuff?
Markers.
You can tell my wife's a teacher. so,
Yeah, well, I was
yeah,
used to be a teacher too. I
Yeah.
let my little teacher come out. Yeah. Yarn,
Yeah,
arrows,
well, good.
cut and paste.
The announcement that I want to make is that there's the meeting about the state parks and that planning process, which is going to be at the Ag Center on Fort Dummer Road, right? Or And that's on the 24th, Thursday, from 7 to 9. And it's in the Maria Lawrence room at the Ag Center. And I assume there'll be signs and arrows and stuff to find it.
So
Does
That's the
everyone
Familari.
know what Gary means by the Egg Center?
Joe Familari's place, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that may not necessarily help either, but yeah,
No,
okay.
right,
That place on Fort Dummer Road.
You know, the red
There
place,
isn't anything
you
else
know. Big
on
red
Fort
barn.
Dummer Road, right?
Right.
when you go out.
Do
There's
you-
a lot
do
of, there's
you
a
know
lot
what
of
we're
red
talking
bounds
about,
in the
Liz?
state.
Yes,
I know, but
because
this
they
is when you
have
go out.
cross-country skiing meets.
On
Right.
the road that goes to Fort Dummer.
Right.
Ah,
It's on the right, big, and it's a big complex of educational offices, and the nursing school is there.
And I'm
is
thinking that
it a
everybody
discussion
got
of state parks? Is that what it is?
the local ones,
The local
you know,
one, yeah.
Brattleboro and Dummerston.
In terms of like what's happening with them? Like,
Management
planning for the
plans.
It's
future.
their own, yeah, it's
Management.
their own planning process that we've been invited to.
Oh,
I guess is
cool.
what
I
I'd say.
I can forward you the email if you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, in
Yes, please.
Dummerston,
Just do it to
yeah.
the whole
Thank
commission,
you.
that would be great, yep.
I think it's the one right on Route 5,
What's that?
the state park in Dummerston.
Yeah,
That's the one
It
right
is.
on Route
Yes,
5 there.
It is.
yeah,
Sort of the pine stand or whatever.
Conveniently located to the Colonel's cabin.
yes.
Oh, the campground.
The what?
Yeah, campground, right. That's what they call it. And there's another
Especially
one,
at the Colonel's cabin.
the Sweets Pond
Oh, yeah, right.
Park too is included in this.
Karaoke State Park.
Hippie theater back in the 70s.
Yeah, really.
They're
So
gonna show
they're
a
gonna
film
talk
about
about
that.
all the parks, and planning for all three, 54 acres or something, I don't know, so. Did everybody get an email about that?
No.
I'm
I
gonna
don't
send it
believe
out.
I did.
No.
I see, I think I saw that you got it, and I maybe got all of them.
Yeah,
I think they must have plucked your,
I'm such a park kind of guy.
right, no, I think they
guess,
plucked
you
your
know.
name off the website for
Yeah.
being the chair of
Oh,
the planning
okay.
commission.
Well, so that's happening. And there's another meeting happening, and I can't remember what it is, and I don't have it written down, but
Do you know
I
what's to
think
do
of
with
it. It's something about stuff we do. but,
Probably a few.
Yeah,
Close enough.
all right, anyway. So, any other business? Any other announcements? Any other business? We have one member of the public here. Hi, Maggie.
From the
Do you
TCAP.
have any public comment except for about the town plan that you're gonna talk about otherwise? Okay, thank you. Okay, well, the next item on our agenda is update on the education chapter and upcoming meetings having to do with the education chapter. And I don't know, Sue, are you gonna talk about this?
Sure. So the education chapter is still very much a work in progress. And I've had conversations with a lot of people involved and played phone tag with a lot of different people as well. Last Monday night, Rod and I attended the BUHS number 6 school district meeting. And they are actually, I think their next meeting is Monday, and they're going to meet a little bit beforehand and formalize some comments to give to me. And then their chair had suggested maybe having a working group put together so we can review those comments and then have a working group of school board members. I think it'd be great to have some planning commissioners, but maybe spend some time in April trying to work together and make something that works for both boards. They didn't provide a lot of the feedback on the draft that night, but a couple of things that stuck out is I think some of the trends they saw differently, so I'm wondering if they have some different numbers than I'd been using or different observations through those numbers. And also, I think they were some of the goals didn't necessarily line up, so I'm interested from hearing from them what their goals are.
So do they come up with I have two questions, actually. One, first has to do with sort of the structure. Is it is it true that at the high school level, more counties come into Brattleboro than?
More
at
towns.
More towns.
Yes.
It's
County,
yeah,
okay.
all right, it's all right. It's a union, so it's a union high school, and that's code for
Regional.
region.
Okay, and then, so are there two different
There's two-
education committees, or whatever you
There's two
call them?
school boards.
Boards.
Yeah, so there's the Brattleboro Town School District, which does the 3 elementary schools.
And not anything with the high school?
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And they do some of the early education
Mhm.
as well. And then you have the Union High School District, which is the middle school, which serves kids from Brattleboro and Vernon.
Okay.
And then the high school is Brattleboro, Vernon, Guilford, Demerson, Putney. And then there's some other
Oh.
towns that maybe tuition their
Yes.
students, like Dover.
Dover tuitions in some students.
Okay.
And
forget about
Halifax.
Marlborough.
Halifax, what's that?
Don't forget about Marlboro.
Marlborough and Halifax, sometimes they come down.
And
what
even
we would
Bellows
say.
Falls sometimes comes
Yeah.
And
down.
the
Yes.
Career Center draws from.
Yes.
further
Yes,
as well.
and the Career Center actually draws from all over Wyndham County, so they actually
Right.
draw from other supervised
Right,
unions.
just in case you thought you had it all squared away.
Yeah.
And the Career
It's
Center
been
is
really-
one end of the high school.
Yeah.
The middle school is kind of, I mean, so
Yeah.
physically, you could be disturbed by trying to walk around and figure out what's going on as well.
Right, okay.
Because it's all, the middle school, the Career Center, and high school are all effectively one complex.
Okay. And for our chapter on education, do we try to take input from both the union and the Brattleboro
Yes.
committees? Is
So,
that-
yes, so I am actually meeting, I have it tentatively scheduled for, I think it's April 7th, to meet with the town school district. So they've all received the first draft that you saw a couple weeks ago. And if they were on our mailing list, I've had some updates from that draft to this draft. So it's still a work in progress. But I think it's a great idea to have a working group with the Union High School. So if anybody's interested in, I know that they were going to try to have a quorum of their board. It would be good if we could.
And we had a meeting with a lot of feedback from education people
Right.
a while back, and did all those, that included private independent schools and colleges. Did they all get copies of this too?
Yes. And then the last layer in terms of review and we need to talk to, the supervisory union, which is not to be confused with the school districts,
Yeah.
is also a player. And the supervisory union relates to more than one, I mean, so yeah, don't go there, it's just another layer.
Southeast.
Right.
Well, it's all the towns in the.
All the towns in the supervisory union.
And
Right.
so they relate to the individual town schools and to the high school board and everything, so,
Right.
yeah. But, so Sue, do you think the town school board, will they be meeting themselves to talk about what they're gonna talk about with us, or
I think they're
you
going to
at
meet to
that meeting?
compile their comments, and then they're going to forward them to me.
Oh, okay.
They debated, I think some of the school board members were quite happy to send their own comments along, and then they decided, well, let's speak with one voice, so. As for the school district, I probably need to follow up with the chair.
And so
She just suggested.
you figure you'll get the comments from the town school board before that meeting and then be able to discuss those things? Or?
No, I
No.
don't think I'll hear from the
Don't
town
either.
school board before we meet, so
Okay.
I'll have to have a conversation with the chair and see how she wants to
On-
proceed,
at
but
least
she ran a date by me, and
Uh-huh.
so.
Okay, all right.
Moving another table around.
But you figure that'll
That
be
one
that.
folded.
Oh, is it folded?
You want some
Yes.
company there at
Yep.
that meeting?
Yeah, come on
you
up to the
think, or-
table.
Sure, I mean, if any commissioners want to come, or, you can go either way.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, that's good though, because, Mark, Julian, and Dave were here,
Yep,
and so it'd be good to
Yes.
yeah, and
have that happen.
I've heard from David along the way.
Yeah.
You can be,
He's interested in other chapters, so.
Uh-huh.
Paul,
Okay.
if
And then,
you want to be around on the end, you can.
what was the date
Makes
of
it
the
easier.
of the
There you go.
high school board, or?
Oh, the high school board?
Yeah,
Well, we met with them last Monday, so that was the 7th.
Yes.
So they meet the 1st and 3rd, so they're gonna be meeting on the 21st.
So that's the
a
high
little
school,
bit
when you
before.
said that at the beginning, that's the high school board.
It's the high school board that's going to meet on the 21st and collate the comments from the individual board members and then make suggested edits or changes to the draft chapter. After, at that, they're going to agree to those and literally kind of compile them all and then forward them to us after that meeting. We aren't present at that meeting to discuss it with them.
won't be.
No.
No, but then we would plan a joint
A work,
meeting.
yeah.
A work
Yeah,
meeting.
so maybe the next round of the draft we'll have a work meeting
Right.
with them.
Okay, all right.
And if I could just mention, I don't want to bog down in this too much, but if I could just mention quickly that I think Sue and I regard this as the core of the education chapter in the sense of this is where the majority of resources are devoted, this is where the majority of children go, this is the majority of people who are involved in educational services. But going back to your comment about or Carolina's comment about who was here earlier, I guess from earlier on we had set an objective, I guess, for the education chapter that would try and see education from the pre-K through to the higher education or lifelong learning spectrum, and how well Brattleboro's resources satisfied those things. I think it's pretty clear that independent school choice and so forth is pretty rich here, but there's other elements that we're trying to pick up on. Including the community college and the work from the Career Center that could be described as workforce training, because that will back into the economic development chapter. So we're still looking to make those kinds of connections in this chapter.
Okay. So that's to say that even though we have these meetings and, some putting stuff together with the town school board and the BUHS board, that's not all there is.
Right.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
It's kind of looking at the existing master plan,
Mm-hmm.
there was no education chapter.
Right.
So what was the thinking to have one now?
I'm hoping somebody behind me will answer the question.
Yeah,
They're not there. Let me make something
Decided
up.
it was important, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if I can recall it, there was a couple of strands. One was that it was excluded. It just wasn't in the earlier plan, and we're not really sure why it was.
Mm-hmm.
It never made the cut. The next thing is that under state statute, we're required to respond to a couple of different things. One is adequate, safe, and affordable childcare, which I don't want to confuse with education, but goes to the issue of the provision of services that would allow households to participate in the paid workforce. That's one of the justifications for that.
Mm-hmm.
So early ed raised some interest because of the now well-established link between early education and success in later life. Not much later, but a little later. And then, and also a sense that which was why I was mentioning the Career Center stuff and the workforce training stuff, that there's a set of relationships or things that we are aware of, including high school graduates leaving town to take up college education outside of the community, and they're not as likely, it seems, to
Leaving
come
the
back.
state.
They leave the state to do that. So in terms of looking at the long-term, sort of the long-term character of the town, trying to think about ways in which education services or educational opportunities shapes people's expectations about the community, and then how effective the community delivers on those things. But
Well,
without
great answer.
without actually broaching the question of curriculum or the quality of the schools from an educational standpoint, but more looking at it from the standpoint of it's a key service provision. It's a key. The schools are, I guess, key institutions in the town. I think. So yeah, I mean they're yeah.
Well,
We decided it was important.
yes,
Yeah.
and well, I thought that answer was really interesting, and that maybe some of those objectives could be put in the goals and objectives in this section.
Right. Okay. Good.
You know, I think we've been wrestling with, like we've been wrestling with everything in the town plan, as though, you know, what can we do, you know? And since there is the town school board and the UHS board, and then there are all the private institutions and so forth and so on, that's the thing that's hard with all this stuff is, what can we do? You know, some of what we can do is say what we like. But what are the actual things, the action steps that we can take as a town, you know?
Right.
So,
Well, it's one of those things where I come from a background of viewing the master plan as primarily a land use plan. So while this is informative, I would wonder how it leads back to a land use control.
that probably won't be our litmus test on everything. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Vermont statute is, I agree with you to something, I mean, that's certainly the tradition, and I guess here, we're required by statute to account for the adequacy of providing educational services to the community. And I guess the view that we took was to identify some demographic trends that continue to be of concern, including college-age kids leaving.
Right.
And then also identifying that the quality of the educational experience here in a community of this size can be a point of attraction, and that they're a vital asset that we feel the community would like to see supported through the town plan process.
Right. Well, it's certainly an economic development
Yeah.
and a major employer as well.
Yeah, in fact, the supervisory union itself, this is a bit tricky.
I think it's
The supervisory union, which
it's in that data that you've got.
takes in other towns, was one of the largest employers in the county, and certainly one of the largest employers in town, by a pretty significant margin. And if you further cull it and say employers that provide health insurance, they're a really big deal. Yeah.
So, Sue, did you see us talking about the chapter beyond?
I didn't, we didn't really allot a lot of time, but if there's members here who want to speak to it or want to shoot me comments, it's still very much a work in progress.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I'm happy to.
Did anybody on the
moving.
commission have any, just really, this is really kind of preliminary stuff, so.
I had in my notes from a previous time to somehow include in education, starting to look at educational buildings, and maybe this has to come under a different chapter, but looking at buildings as community centers, as something, could be a goal with objectives under it, that our school buildings get utilized more, and how to set that, you know.
I think that that's a good discussion to have in the working group.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that I want to get too far into. It's one of those
No,
things
but
that's
just
going to raise.
to have a note there about it so that
Yep.
it's flagged for
Yep.
them too.
Sure.
And that would be true of the town school board as well,
Yeah.
Right.
which we're not really anticipating having a working meeting with, but.
No, but, I mean, that might be something
We can bring it up.
that comes out of it if there's some, if we need to.
Do you have the notes from, extra copies of the notes from Sadie and Kathleen? for
Yep.
Any of the people here?
I don't have too many extra copies. I just have ones for the commissioners.
Okay, anything else that anybody had? Again, first take, or however you want to say that. I guess, one thing that I wondered about was the vision, what those boards would say their vision was.
Yeah.
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 About education in town.
Yeah,
So-
and they one of them started to allude to the fact that this is different than
Oh.
what theirs is.
Yes.
So this
Oh,
is good.
yeah.
It'll be good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and our response was, we offered this as sort of at least a talking point to
Yeah.
initiate a dialogue. And
Good.
so that's where we're taking it.
All right. Well, I would encourage anybody that can to plan on attending the April 7th meeting with the town school board, keeping Sue company, and to forward anything that you feel like should be included in that meeting to the planning department, and ask members of the public, hi, public, does anybody have any comments about the education chapter? Okay, Maggie, go ahead.
Maggie Barton-Hagan, I'm a member of the Town Plan Advisory Group. It's been looking at this process and providing comments and observations for the last over a year. For those of you who are not familiar with us. And I did not get a revised draft with my packet, so I'm not sure what has changed. For education, I got the energy, but not education.
Really?
So I'm not sure what changed, if anything. So
There-
all I can do is respond to the draft that I have, and I'm wondering if the language under actions around student representatives on boards and commissions could be strengthened a little bit, rather than just exploring if there's a way to, convey more seeking inclusion, so that it's more active. I know when Allison Below spoke with our group about youth in this community, one of the things that she very much pointed out was that it would be really a great idea to have youth representatives on whatever boards and commissions we could do that with, and to not only encourage their participation and get their very fresh ideas, but communicating the fact that this town is interested in its young people and wanting to stay. And what better way to convey that to them than have them be a participant in decision making? So I would really love to see a little bit more active, stronger language in that one statement. And I don't know who's responsible for
That might,
pursuing representatives, those student representatives, but maybe somebody can be designated. I know that was a discussion we had, along with the action steps, are they one of the individuals tasked with doing something?
So the select board is who appoints the boards and commissions, members. So that would probably be who would, yeah.
Would we also need to make changes to anything in terms of, if they're non-voting, that's something, will we need to make changes to anything to make them voting members? Like, would this become an 8-person commission with 8 votes now, or how does that work?
it's beyond our purview at this moment.
All right, that's fine. That's
Well,
cool.
I mean, it's a good question. I mean,
That's part
some
of
boards
exploring
have,
it, I guess,
you know,
isn't it?
Right.
a lot of boards have
Okay.
a certain number, so it would be something to be encountered.
Right.
Whether, if it's, especially if it's like a 1-year position, is it voting, non-voting?
Okay, that's part of
Yeah.
exploring
Span.
this. Okay.
Maybe proposal to the select board, or would that have to be in the charter and all that kind of, gets a little complicated. It might be something that gets tied in with community service, because kids have to do community service, and they could be as a member of a certain board, and I don't know if they have political science courses at the high school, these could all be somehow tied in.
So Maggie,
Up
could
for
you accept
discussion.
that exploration
Select
would involve checking those kinds of things out? I mean, I think if somebody was gonna explore that, they would do something with those answers,
I would, you know, explore is a great word, and it probably is appropriate if inclusion of students has never been done before, but I'd like to see it combined with another more active word, you know, explore and seek, or explore and encourage, or explore and something that,
Okay.
you know, that would suggest it's not just, oh, we'll look at it, but we won't really do anything. So
Yeah.
I'd like a little, I'd like, you know, I mean, my feedback is just perhaps it would be useful to have a little bit more active language in that.
Okay.
Maybe that's an objective, and then there needs to be different action steps to take under that, so it might need to be switched up to objective rather than an action.
I think explore is a good one-year word, but if this is a 5-year document,
Yeah,
Right.
hopefully we'll get farther along in year 3.
yeah.
Use your one.
Are they voting members?
This is a lot more like the Antarctic than you might imagine.
Yes.
We
Okay,
know.
I
And
discovered
I just
that.
have one other comment.
sure.
And that is, and I'm not sure if this goes into this chapter or not, but the idea of the comprehensive town website under education, I know that there was something stated in the municipal services chapter draft that had to do with internet too, so I'm not sure where it was going to go, but I know that was, and I don't know if that was included in the revised draft of the education draft.
No,
or not.
it's in new municipal
It's in
services,
municipal.
because, yeah, there's a couple of places that's kind of showed up, including the white paper that you'll all receive for your next meeting with the BAB presentation, the marketing
Right.
study that they had. That shows in there. So that seemed more of like a town project.
I think a couple other things you could take as working to the working group. I'm looking at things that we mentioned in the past. An item that would be about recycling programs in the schools. I know they already do it, but it might be just nice to have it as a goal and objectives written in with targets. And then again, along the line of student representatives on boards, but expanding student community service to be more in that same line, whether they're actually members of boards, but to maybe be involved, like the way we've had these other college students coming in and shadowing our meetings. Sometimes that might be just notes that came back from us as just, you can just take to them and see what how it lands.
You can come.
Whether I can or not, I don't know. I'll have to look
Yeah.
at my calendar, but
What time
but
is
I'm
the
just
meeting?
telling you so that you get them on there.
What time is that meeting?
I don't,
on the
it's not
7th?
set up yet. We were
Okay.
going to set it up
We'll let you
after.
know.
April
Yep,
7th, April 7th, you said?
No, the 7th is with I think it's the 7th with the town school board.
Yes.
The working group will be with the high school,
Oh, okay.
so.
And that
I
has-
mean,
that
they
date-
would be more appropriate if we're talking about community service.
Yeah,
but-
yeah, for sure.
That date hasn't been set yet. We'll let you know. That would be good if you could come on.
Okay,
Great, thanks.
all right, so why don't we leave the world of education behind for a little bit and move on to energy.
Yeah, really.
5-hour energy, that's all the rage these days, right? Me neither, but it says we ought to, so. So this is a chapter discussion of energy, and we have a bunch of people from the Energy Committee here joining us. Just grab my... So, we have talked about some of this stuff before. Everybody got a copy of the latest draft energy chapter, and then the Energy Committee's comments on the draft energy chapter, I hope. The white and the lavender. So Sue and Rod, did you have a a way you would like to proceed with this? Rod, did you do most of the
Yeah.
writing on the
Yeah.
chapter?
So yeah, I can speak most directly, I guess, at the beginning to the white version, which is the draft that I provided to you and to the Energy Committee and Paul for their comments. It's still a very early version of the draft. I would say that there are two pieces of current conditions that need to be filled in that would make a significant change. Well, actually one at least. There's a small section on page 4 of the chapter that is headed Energy and Transportation. And then the other section that's effectively missing, so right now, which would also come under current conditions, would be energy and land use, or maybe energy and land use policy. The reason why that's missing a little bit at this point is that I think that there are some key discussions that are more land use focused in their orientation than energy that are going to back into the energy question. So I wanted to flag that and say that land use is coming up, including discussion of the current land use regulations for Brattleboro and the need to revise them, and that one of the principles for revising them would be to, in very broad terms, address energy efficiency or energy issues through the land use code. And the ways I had imagined that we would encounter that would be consideration of smart growth-based planning principles or something similar to that. Mm-hmm. I think while that's, and the current code doesn't, the current zoning ordinance doesn't really, include any language like that, and nor do the subdivision regulations. That being said, I don't think it's true to describe Brattleboro as being a victim of sprawl of the, of the most typical kind. So, one way of actually viewing it is that, as the community has as an asset a fairly compact form as a consequence of the topography and the historic settlement patterns as it is. There's clearly a fairly strong east-west axis along Route 9, and then there's Interstate 91 acts as kind of a barrier, sort of captures the older, more downtown neighborhoods from those further out. So, I want to also just say we have to think about that fairly carefully. So that's the thing that's missing, if you like. The other thing that's a challenge is really how to address something like energy and transportation in a meaningful way, partly because we're either not in control of those assets or the policies. So things such as the road network, pricing structures for vehicles or fuel use, or the railroads are all part of the transportation economy that the town therefore the town plan doesn't have much of a role in directly at all. So I also want to caution commissioners and others that anything that we would propose as an action or as an objective or as a goal with regard to transportation needs to be made in the knowledge that we don't have a whole lot of influence or effect on what's going on, number one. Number two, because of our location on 91 and Route 9, we actually have, as a community, our character is really strongly influenced by the amount of transportation of goods and people that's focused here. So, in other words, as much as we might want to, well, let me just say it this way, compared to other communities in Vermont that might have a more remote location, we actually are more intimately connected with the economy around transportation than many other communities. And so therefore any policy setting or goals or objectives that we come up with around energy and transportation need to acknowledge that we've got a pretty significant commitment to the existing mainstream system of transportation, which is fossil fuel based. And so I think it's I think what we need here to some extent is some pretty careful thinking on the part of commissioners and some discussion about how you want that to sit. Generally, when I've looked at energy chapters in other town plans across the state, there's a really strong focus on buildings and on in particular residential buildings, because that's the area that most people are comfortable talking about. That's the area most people think that you can make a difference, and that's closer to the regular purview of a town plan. But I'd actually say on the basis of that pie chart that is on page 4, it's pretty clear that if you use greenhouse emissions as a kind of a rough measure of where most of the energy is consumed, transportation is by far the largest component of, or contributor to emissions, and therefore I think it's fair to say it's the biggest user of energy. And I don't think there'd be too much rearrangement of those smaller slices of the pie when you start talking about energy consumption versus greenhouse emissions. So I wanted to just flag at the beginning that I think one of the important conversations we need to have, like now, is how to actually adopt the right voice to address the balance between, the built form in Brattleboro and transportation as it relates to the energy question. So, that being said, many of the changes that I think that the Energy Committee have provided make sense and are fine. In terms of the kind of, from a writing standpoint, I think that from a writing standpoint, just from a chapter drafting standpoint, I think we need to be concerned about not having too many goals, not having too many objectives, and most importantly, controlling the number of actions to be taken, which I think at this point are all those things are there's probably too many of them. From a practical standpoint.
Well, it looks like there's 11 actions in what you wrote, and
Yeah.
12 in what they wrote.
Yeah, I think 11 is too
You think
many.
11 is too many?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I'm
That's what
looking,
I was gonna
I'm
ask.
looking for some culling to go on here,
Okay.
and to be guided by you on that. I mean, I think that I ended up with 11 because I was throwing things in there, but looking for advice on how to cut them out.
Well, don't the actions to be taken come from the objectives?
Yeah.
You have certain objectives, and
So I
then
think-
under each objective, there might be a number of actions. So maybe we need to, obviously, energy has a transportation section aspect. It does have a land use aspect. It has a buildings
Mm-hmm.
and energy efficiency aspect. It also has an agriculture aspect, actually, interestingly enough, that we don't really usually address, but maybe it could just be put into those handful of categories and then have,
Well, I spent some time with the objectives trying to break them
Yeah,
down
yeah,
into
that'd be
simpler, and I didn't quite get all the way there, but it seems like there's a couple that are on data gathering.
Yes.
There's one or two on education where kind of everything else would funnel through this need to educate. I'm sure I could go farther and there'd be an objective towards conservation, which might cross over into education, but I think that's what we need to do, is narrow down the objectives to kind of, let's go with the simple words and then
I'd like to,
shout them.
under objectives, the first one.
Yep.
Reduce
Oh, I'm sorry, are we talking purple, I mean lavender here?
Yeah, must be.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, it would be really good to try and track
Okay, so
which one we're in.
Which is the newer?
Lavender is the comments from the Energy Committee,
From
and
this.
white is what they reacted to.
It's
Got it.
the comments on the draft that we received.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Right.
So the objective number one, reduce Brattleboro's total energy consumption 40% by 2030 from, there's like 3 different things here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So how did those numbers, how did we arrive at those particular numbers?
Speak to that.
Please.
The carbon emissions reduction goals are taken from goals that have been set by scientists
Okay.
who are saying we need to reduce 80% by 2050 in order to avoid the worst effects of climate change.
Good.
So I
Okay.
went back from there
Okay.
proportionally.
Okay.
And then the total energy consumption, 40%, is just the same as the total carbon emissions.
Right. So you got these from other scientific community things. Okay. All right. And when we talk about these, and maybe you don't know the answer, and maybe we don't have an answer right now. When we say total energy consumption, are we considering? So this must be transportation and built environment. Are you guys seeing this as including tourists that are sort of driving through, or
Right.
not? Because if we sort of count that in there, it changes the numbers. Now we do have some control when it comes to hotels and units that they're staying in the built environment. We really don't have any control over the transportation side of that.
We did a baseline greenhouse gas inventory
Mhm.
in 2002 and updated it in 2008. And it's in three basic parts to that. One part is electricity, which is very precise. We can get it from the power company. Another part is heating oil use in buildings, which is based on statistics from the Department of Energy. So that is not precise. It's a broad estimate.
Right.
And then the third part is transportation, which is based on traffic counts from the Agency of Transportation, Vermont Agency of Transportation.
What about natural gas?
That's included,
That's included in that oil number.
yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's broken down by type of fuel.
Right. Okay.
So the Agency of Transportation does traffic counts on certain roads and streets in Brattleboro.
Okay.
And from those, you can make an estimate of your vehicle miles traveled annually. And again, it's not precise, but it is a number that can be used for comparison
Right.
in later
Right.
years.
Right.
So that would just include anyone who is driving
Right.
the streets of Brattleboro.
Okay. And this, because these numbers go beyond, the Kyoto is that's only a goal to 2020, right?
Yep.
By 2020, meet 1990.
Yeah, it gets 1990 by 2020.
Okay. And this goes beyond that. Well, it goes beyond it in time horizon.
Yes, that's true.
Does it go beyond it so by 2020, we have reduced total carbon emissions by 20%. That's the only 2020 goal we have.
Yeah.
From a marketing perspective of the town, I really like this. These goals are in here. I'm wondering if we used that term, if it wouldn't be simpler for the rest of the world to understand, or I don't know. I'm posing this as a question because I know as somebody who sort of works in this field, that the more data we throw at people, the more they glaze over.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the more I tell stories and put labels on, the more people go, oh, I can do that, and then hopefully they write a check. So,
Well, I
I
mean,
don't
I
know what
read
the right
that.
answer is, but.
I read that, and it was like the same thing. Well, what's the baseline? What does that mean? So if this
Yeah.
stays, there needs to be a lot more information in the chapter as to how it was
maybe
derived, because
context.
it doesn't, yeah, there's no context.
Right.
It's like, well, what does it really mean?
It actually,
What,
it
well,
kind
what
of
is it?
calls
yeah,
out for a
right.
graphic of some sort
Yeah.
as I'm looking at it.
Right.
I
Well,
don't know what that graphic is just yet, but
to go back a couple of steps here, I actually think that we need to make, what I'd say is that commissioners need more information on the model that's been used to derive these figures, or figure out as a group how comfortable you are with saying something like, okay, so we know that Kyoto didn't pass, but we understand what went into the process of getting those goals that Kyoto reviewed. We think Brattleboro should meet the Kyoto, agreement requirements as a goal, right? So, and then developing that information, graphically as well as in a sort of a narrative form would be something that the chapter could address. Right now, listening to Paul and looking at these numbers, I actually have more questions than answers about how the information is actually put together and our ability to actually track it in a meaningful way. So that I also think that when we're going to have an objective that is, as specific as this with target figures, that we should be able to demonstrate in an appendix or somewhere else in the document how we got to those numbers and how we expect to be able to track it, because otherwise it doesn't have that much meaning as an objective.
well,
Sarah?
I'm comfortable with where the numbers came from. I'm sure you could define it for us and we could put it in an appendix. I'm comfortable
Right.
that's how we communicate it is actually, I like having numbers in here because then we've got something to shoot for.
Right.
Sarah?
I think that was one of our feelings as we went through the draft in looking at the objectives, is that we felt they needed targets. So while we may not be wedded to these particular targets, especially maybe in this case, I think we felt that we needed targets because otherwise it was difficult for us to wrap our hands around what
Right.
we're supposed to do or what actions might be appropriate. So and that's basically, that's what it is. I think that this one was related to number 3, Paul. If you take a look at the objectives here on the first version and then on the committee's version.
Yeah, I think I had something like set a target for, well, you've got it. I think I had,
Begin to record CO2 emissions produced in Brattleboro.
right.
Just, we felt uncomfortable just having that out there. What did that mean for us to do? So that was one of our suggestions, is to create targets within each of the objectives.
Okay, let me just break that out a little bit for me. My problem is that I don't think that the data is robust enough right now to actually establish a baseline. And so my problem is, I would prefer to see it that you do the work so that you can establish a baseline, and I think that's a respectable goal for a 5-year period. And then you can measure your progress against that baseline. But right now what I'd say is that we certainly don't have meaningful data stretching back to the date of the last town plan, right? So that means that we need to build a database. And I know that that can sound pretty boring and not very committed, but what I'd say is that if we're going to set meaningful targets or meaningful goals, then we have an obligation to set up something that's robust. And Paul and I have talked about this at length, and with other people, including people from VNRC and other entities. There isn't a really good, consistent model across the state for addressing things like, if a vehicle has got New Jersey license plates on it and it travels through Brattleboro on I-91, Do you attribute the CO emissions and the energy that's consumed to the zip code from where it's registered, or do you measure it where it's dumped in the atmosphere, which would be here, or how else do you do it, and how would we calculate that? And so there's, yes, and even if you want to talk about Brattleboro's role as a regional hub, I and Sue, like many other people here, come into Brattleboro for work and then turn around and leave. Is my CO2 emissions going to be measured as something that happens in Brattleboro or happens in Putney, because that's where my car is registered? So, you know, these are, so it gets really technical very sort of, you know, quickly. And what these figures, that's why I would prefer something that was easy to describe, that was easy to have a visual image for, or even things that are bracketed in some way. But I think that the key point here is that we don't have good enough quality data to make definitive statements about the energy use patterns that we have right now, either as households and businesses or as people moving around.
Paul?
Just as a point of clarification, what I've used to gather energy data and to come up with the baseline that we have is based on a system from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, which has a software program that we have that's used by many local governments around the world. But I also want to mention that they're in the process of setting up a national standard for measuring greenhouse gas emissions across an entire town or city, a protocol that can be used for comparison among cities all over the world. They have one now for just emissions from municipal buildings, in other words, local government operations in buildings, but they don't have one yet for an entire city. And then the process of setting that up, and that'll be available in August of this year.
That's to collect data or to?
To collect and report data.
So the models, I'm sorry, it's a working model now, and you'll plug the data in and you'll get the answer, or they're collecting the data and they're developing the model? I'm not clear.
Well, they have a system now for
Right.
collecting the data. For example, with transportation, they count emissions from any car
Mhm.
that would operate within a town as
Right.
part of that town's
Right.
emissions. They don't
Okay.
break it out depending on where the car is from.
Right.
That's the system they're using now, but they don't have a protocol for a town-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory
Okay.
that is internationally accepted.
Right.
But they're in the process of developing that.
And we have data for that from 2008 through 2010 because we were members of ICLEI for those 2 years, but we don't have it now. We're not currently collecting it because we're not a member of ICLEI right now. Is that correct?
We have data for 2008.
Yep.
And we haven't collected any for the entire town since then.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And so what would it take to do 2009, 2010 and on forwards through 2000 and through the life of the town plan?
I could do 2010 now, basically. As long as the statistics are out.
Right.
From the Department of Energy and so forth, I can do that now.
So does the DOE produce reports that will say within this town, this is how much electric and stuff is used in municipal or commercial buildings versus residential?
Well, again, the electric data you get from the power company, that's very specific.
So we could get gross electric data from the power company that
We have
says
some of that.
We
in
do.
Brattleboro residential.
That's in the chapter now.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah,
Right.
that's what that
All
is.
that's
Yeah.
here.
Right.
Okay.
The heating well data is a figure, it's number of gallons per square foot for businesses or residences in your region.
So
Okay.
when you have something like that, Paul, and I would assume with propane it would be a similar kind of thing, you make assumptions about the insulation value or the relative tightness of buildings and things like that?
Or even the age.
I mean, how would you gauge, where you are and then figure out 5 years along where you are. I mean, how do you do that?
Well, that's a weakness of using those kind of statistics,
Mhm.
because you can't measure those.
Well,
And like with
Sensitive,
transportation,
those
for
kinds of
instance, how do you gauge, you know, I mean, I would guess that Brattleboro, for example, has a higher percentage of Priuses than most places in the world, but I don't know.
Nah, actually.
Who knows? Well, whatever.
No.
Whatever. I
We're
would
not
guess,
wealthy enough.
I don't know if, how do you figure out what the mix of, what the, you know, what the miles per gallon, you know, how do you know that? How do you figure the mix of your vehicles and
The software assumes a certain miles per gallon
yeah,
nationally, an average.
It's the national
Somebody
fleet
else has
average,
figured
which
out
is
how to do
20
it.
miles per gallon.
but, so what if somehow or other we're better than the national average? We wouldn't have any way of knowing that, you know,
That's true.
right?
we would in the built environment.
Right, not in the,
But I'm
not
just
in the
saying
transportation.
For now, for transportation.
Right,
How would we
transportation,
know in the built environment?
Energy Star, there's an Energy Star program. I know it exists for commercial.
Right,
I don't know if it
Right.
exists for residential.
it
but I
does,
would believe
but
it
it's for
does.
new construction, basically,
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if Energy Star has anything. So they don't have anything for existing?
Not really,
Residential?
no. I mean, they have some, but it's
Because you
it's
can,
mostly on new
do comparisons. You,
construction.
you can feed the electric and oil or gas use in, and it will average based on weather, days per year, and all kinds of things, and pop out a number and tell you if you're above or below average and by how much per square foot for commercial. So technically, we could take our total amount of, we either have to do it by building or take our total amount of commercial building space, and hopefully could do it with residential as well. I mean, it's not like, we can't do it in like a day, but, you know,
Right.
the data
Well,
exists and
I
perhaps it
think,
could
you know,
be-
when we had originally had that big meeting about energy, the environment, land use, and whatever the other couple of things were,
Right.
I was in the energy group, I think you were, Paul, right? And I mean, it seems like coming up with numbers that are legitimate and believable and actionable in a way, I mean, inspirational, you know, is a quite an undertaking, I think. I think it's worth it, you know. I mean, that's why when you know, to have a goal of coming up with a set of statistics and keeping track and trying to see what kind of progress we're making, that is a big goal in my opinion. I think it's, you know, I don't think I think you have to have a set of numbers that people can believe and get behind, and then have a set of numbers that's simple enough that every kid in school can say, you know, by this year, we're going to do that, you know? So everybody knows how the numbers were developed, and everybody can believe that if we all do this kind of thing, you know, that's going to improve the numbers, and we're going to see it in the numbers next year, the year after, you know? And I think without people really knowing and believing that, it's going to be hard to have these kind of targets make any impact, you know? Because otherwise, they're just out there in the
As the price of
CO2
gas
somewhere.
goes up, those targets are gonna get more useful no matter what
Well-
figure you have, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, but
And those can
do you see
create-
what I'm saying?
Yeah,
think-
I do.
I think it has to be something like, you know, it has to go to the level of a slogan almost, you know, that people can get behind, you know? I mean, for it to have power.
Yeah, Gary, I have some questions about that. If we're measuring it and coming up with an absolute number, that's really difficult because at the same time, we're trying to have economic development and even more tourists come through. So if we're setting a downward goal, then we'd be limiting ourselves in terms of growth, especially now when you're finding a baseline and it's a recession. it's difficult to project that baseline when it's kind of depressed, and we're trying to really improve our economic development and improve tourism and having more cars from New Jersey
There's
come up on
jobs, yeah.
91 and more jobs and so forth. So we would be kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we had a number to reduce, I mean, a goal to be more sustainable and reduce emissions and so forth is good, but if we came up with a number, then it might be a number that we'd be happy to miss.
Yeah.
Well, it might not take that form, though. It might take the form of, we would like to improve in any, and I hesitate to talk about transportation, because, I almost think we should take transportation out of this.
Put it in a different category.
Yeah, put it in a different category.
Right, which is why it's so thinly treated here, because it's extremely problematic in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
But, that's a discussion I think we do need to have, like Rod said, but a goal of, reducing the BTUs per square foot, that I think would be great in commercial and residential.
Almost like the goal should be for individual businesses and households and,
Yeah.
Municipal buildings, not a goal for the whole town.
Like if you could split it and measure efficiency in some way, and then measure growth in another way, then you could have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, a couple of caveats there. I don't think it's appropriate for the town plan to actually target or identify individual businesses or individual homes. I think that's outside the scope of the plan in some way. I think, and this is where it gets back to, how do you really want to address or frame this chapter, and do you want this chapter to be broadly encouraging and enthusiastic of, energy conservation and energy efficiency, and how far can you really take that? Or, and what mandate does the Planning Commission and ultimately the Select Board have to impose anything? First point here that's really key is the Select Board has practically it has a bully pulpit at best here, and the lead by example. And I think that the recent experience of the town taking on the Honeywell project and doing some other key things, I wouldn't give them an A, but I think they've made some serious efforts to be conscious of energy consumption and efficiency measures, and wherever possible, they take the energy efficient route. And the town as an organization takes advantage of grant programs and other things when they come along with that as a motive or as a target. So switching out all the traffic lights that went away were circa 1960 something or other traffic lights that were oddly extremely inefficient, and have been replaced with high efficiency LED traffic signals that will contribute to the bottom line.
Those are specific actions that have been taken that are achievable and measurable. There could be
Yes.
other similar things.
And we could do that. We could break that out. We could actually figure out, okay, in 2009 when we had the old traffic lights, we paid this much for electricity to have the traffic lights working. And in 2011, here is the bill, and it's this. We can actually measure those differences. And that's good, and I think that that's where we sort of need to take it. I think that going back to Paul's comments, the single biggest challenge here is to actually come up with meaningful baseline figures, which is why I think it would be great if we could make the commitment going forward so that by the end of the 2011 town plan, so by that 2016, we were really sitting on data from 2008 through 2016, so that would be 8 years of data that we were processing through the same software with the same assumptions behind it, and we were able to discuss it and make some very refined decisions about it. But right now, as far as I can tell, we're not a member of ICLEI, so we've got this challenge with even processing the data right now. And so that's one concern. Then I think that Gary's points and Jim's points are really good about the assumptions that are built into ICLEI, and they run at very generalized. There are very generalized assumptions in there about the age of the building, or the quality of the building, or how much insulation is present, or what the average, what the national average for vehicles is, and what therefore the national average fuel consumption. These are all very, very, very bland and not very tractable numbers in the end. So on average, because of the local weather conditions and a whole bunch of other things, fuel consumption, the mileage of vehicles in New England is way worse than it is in other parts of the country. It's just a given. Because so you get into these real, so if you want to actually track what you really are actually doing, then this might be the best model going, but it's not going to get you these target numbers, is what I'm trying to get at.
Sarah?
I would be happy to, we did some work before on climate change targets and goals with state, and it's just coming back to me. I think we did that in 2005, 2006, and I'd be happy to send you some information on that to see if there's anything out there that's relevant to how we want to proceed here. I don't know that it is, but it might be helpful. There are other statewide targets that I could send this way and see if they're helpful to how we're trying to do it. For us, I think the important thing was to, I'm looking at, for instance, number 7. I'm looking at number 9 on the objectives in the original version, and then I'm looking at number 7 on the revised version. And the one in 9 says review land use regulations to foster compact development, which I think we definitely need to do. But so reviewing the land use regulations is one thing, but analyzing land use regulations in number 7 feels more that there's more action and more target. You're analyzing for a purpose land use regulations to foster compact development, analyze existing zoning bylaws for barriers to efficiency and conservation efforts. There was just a sort of an expansion of number 9 in the original to the 7 in the. I think that's just sort of the thing we're talking about.
So you would star that one. That's a very important one as far as you're concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to start
So
that
those are
and
two
say that that's
actions.
probably, that could easily be an action under some sort of objective
Right.
on renewable,
Right.
or not renewable, conservation of energy.
Right.
Yeah, I always
So,
think there's
might go,
that,
there's always
that
like,
tough thing between what some people consider an
An
objection,
objective
what
and-
others consider an action.
yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
yeah.
And I think in this one, what we're looking for here is we want to foster compact development, and
Yeah.
we also want to look for barriers. And then I think that there would be an action under it, looking, analyzing the barriers or looking at the barriers to see then what can we do about that.
Yeah.
Right off the top of the bat, partly 1 and 2 family dwellings are exempt from site plan review under state statute, and 1 and 2 family dwellings are the most frequent household form of housing in the state. And that would, and that even if we were to change the land use regulations in town, we couldn't interfere with that state statute. And we couldn't review the location of our house vis-a-vis, to the sun,
Orientation to the sun, yeah.
without site plan review. So there are just, this is where it's just like, it's fine to do it and it's fine to say it. It's also really important that we call it the way it is. And I would love it if the state changed that.
Well, that's what I'm sort of getting at here, is that there is a relationship. Obviously, you just named one of what, but if we don't know that and list that, there's no way to go to the legislature
That's
to
right.
do it. So what I'm looking at is we need to name those things.
Sure.
And we need
Yeah.
to be serious about how we name them. And then we need to decide if this is important enough to put it into a bill form. And then it also stimulates that same conversation about what we're gonna do up there. And I just see it important to list these and name them.
So even though,
Otherwise, they're in a sort of a fog. I didn't know what you just said, and this would help me learn that.
so you're saying even though some of these things aren't things we can actually do per se, having them there as goals or objectives has a different kind of ripple
Yeah.
effect. And even this one, even though there's no statutes for single-family and two-family dwellings, it could be part of something that's given to somebody who comes to build a single-family home, that these are, these are things that in our town, we think about, we have an awareness around these things. You might want to have this when you build your house on your lot. But it certainly would impact developers who are going to come in, not that we have a lot of them at the moment, but, but,
This is a good time to do it before all that.
but yeah.
Right.
But
And even if,
boom comes.
Well,
Yes,
but for
that's-
example, when, one of the last zoning ordinances that was done for Putney Road, it was a residential zone. It was, it's behind where the Northeast Co-op building, the new chapter is now. That area is a zone for residential, and, we talked long and hard about what sort of density we would allow there. And in the end, some people thought that it wasn't dense enough, and that's something simple that we could, it's simple. It requires a lot of discussion and
Right.
pros and cons and everything, but that is something in the land use
Right.
regs that in a zone, we could say we want it to be denser, and I know there's problems with density, but, that's the sort of thing that is possible for us to do. And it's possible for the planning commission to work on, which I think that's an important thing to remember about some of this stuff, is that, some of the things that we put into the town plan as action steps, if we can put some things in that are mostly the purview of the planning commission, and the planning commission is planning to do those things, then, that helps implementation. So, I like the step two, but I don't know, like Rod said, what we can do, but.
Can we make a distinction then between what the Energy Commission's actions will be going down the road and what the Planning Commission's actions would be? Would that
Yes,
help?
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, because they will exist separate from us.
Right, and for me, coming at this from nowhere, it wasn't clear to me who would be performing these things, and if that were clarified, I think it would make more sense.
I'd like to hear a little bit more. These guys are all here, and we're already a good 45 minutes into this conversation, and I'd like to know if any more specifics from our Energy Committee public that's here. And even Maggie, who was on the TPAG, because maybe there's some interesting stuff that you have from TPAG stuff around energy, I don't know. But since we have you all
Gary.
here, I would hate to lose this opportunity.
Paul?
Just going back to targets for a minute, I think you could argue about the best way to establish a baseline, what your target should be, but I think the Energy Committee felt that it's important to have some targets in order to measure progress, because otherwise, there's no mechanism in place to know if you're making progress with your programs. So I think that's really what we're getting at, is we want a way to verify if we're really doing what we're supposed to be doing, really making
Well,
progress.
Can I ask you something? So I'm looking at this thing on page 3 here with the account type and kilowatt hours and things like that. So it's got number of residential accounts, 5,464, 33 million and change of kilowatt hours. That's, yeah, the bottom graph. The way I'm seeing this, I'm no genius, and you sound like you know a lot about this. The lister's office must have square footage of residential, total residential in Brattleboro,
Yep.
right? Could we not get that number and say, okay, as of 2009, we used 33 million and change,
For this
which
many square
is,
feet.
make some, yeah, make some
Right.
division and say by 2016, we want to be average to be, set some target of 20% lower, and that's what we want it to be per square foot on the residential side, do the same thing on the construction side. They may not be perfect numbers, I'm sure the lister's office isn't perfect, but it's that gets rid of our problem of the false choice, and it gives us targets that are real numbers.
But it doesn't accommodate for growth.
It doesn't sure it accommodates your growth, because we're talking about average square
footage.
average
Sorry.
square
Footage.
foot.
All right. So the one other factor that would be interesting there is the population in Brattleboro has grown just a tiny little bit in the last 10-year period. So particularly for residential use, you kind of get it by use per square foot, but there's another layer down where you could have, occupants
Yeah.
and per square foot and
Well,
energy
that could be
usage.
another way to
So,
look at the numbers
right.
too, is say,
Yeah.
we could do it by population. The thing we can't do there, well, we could technically get the total number of workers, and we could have more than one goal,
Yeah,
right? Because 50 years ago, a lot more people lived in per square foot, right?
Right,
50
exactly.
years
That-
ago,
that
a family of 5 lived in 800 square
that's
feet.
partly what exactly what I'm getting at is you at the national level, if you go back to the last oil crisis in the early 1970s, what followed on from that was a much bigger interest and concern in residential construction in particular, with energy efficiency and making houses tighter and more insulation and better windows and so forth became much more a given and sort of an industry standard. And what you actually see is a huge takeoff in the average size of the American home, and you actually also see at the same time a beginning of a reduction in the number. So in the end, what you actually end up with is the CO2 emissions or the kilowatt hours per occupant of a residence has actually gone up.
Right.
So all the
But
efficiency
the
benefits.
usage per square foot is
All the
down.
efficiency benefits have actually been lost to bigger, a lower density and bigger buildings, basically. And that's true to some extent of autos as well.
So maybe a more interesting number would be per person.
Yep.
Point is, we've got some numbers here, and to get to your point of we need to set some targets, maybe we should take what we've got that we feel is within 10% accurate and use it to set some targets, so that we've got something. Because I agree with you, I don't think we have enough teeth in here.
Right, and I agree with Paul's comment too, except to say that the numbers that we do have, I mean, I think it's fine to set targets. I think it's a really good objective. What I'd say about a target is it's only as good as the baseline that it starts from. And, so I think, approaching it this way solves that problem to some extent. But the baseline numbers that we have right now, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in terms of how they're put together, and nor does the total amount of data that we have. It's not very deep. It only goes back to 2008, for instance. So, we are starting, is what I'm saying. The point is here that we are starting the whole process of collecting meaningful data.
So can we say that we would all like to have some targets? I mean,
No, I don't think taking 5 years to create targets is appropriate. I think we need targets.
I would agree with what Paul said. I think some targets, reasonable targets that can be achieved within the time frame of the plan are sensible. But if you're looking at it from the overview, and this goes back to something Sarah said, I think the key elements here are principles, value, intent. And if Brattleboro indicates its intent of how they want to deal with energy issues, how they want to deal with, cutting emissions without damaging, and I mean, it's anybody's guess what the next 5 years are going to look like as far as continued tourism or growth. I mean, who knows? If gas goes to $6 or $7 a gallon, we may not see too many New Jersey plates here. So what is it that we wanna,
Just to pick on one.
She's from New Jersey.
It's a potential reality
Yeah.
that we have to look at and
That's right.
think about.
So, to piggyback on that, it's sort of like, I just keep going back in this whole process, I realize is that, what do we want our town to look like?
That's right.
That is the question. And it's not, that's where we have to be, and then is, what are the kinds of policies that we can set to get to the outcomes that we're striving for? How are we gonna monitor that, and what kind of actions are we gonna take? And I realize there are a lot of limitations and a lot of barriers to this, but I think it's helpful, like what you've taught me, Rod, is that it is complicated, what the things are that are keeping us from reaching what we want our town to look like. And I think we have to name those things, and that's, I don't have this knowledge, you two do, but how are we going to, okay, so here's the barrier, so how are we gonna maneuver to get us and try to change things either legislatively or whatever, however we do that, to get us to be the town that we wanna look like and be. Again, what are those values?
What's the intent?
What's the intent, the values? So I think that's how we have, is this correct? Please chime in. I think that's how we approach this issue.
I'm curious, do you think there's and it wouldn't be for the town plan, but for the Energy Committee, and I'd be happy to participate, do you think there's some inventory list that we can actually create of those barriers?
I think that Rod has made it very clear that there are a lot of zoning, and I know that they have respect for smart growth. It's a value of the state. We spent, I don't know how many years in my committee creating that smart growth legislation. It's a value of the state. It passed, it's law.
I think to get back to meaningful targets and object, I think everyone likes targets. I think it makes sense. I think it's clear. I think you can make a clear statement about it. I would underscore again, you have to have faith in the baseline, and then the targets have to be realistic. And then stepping back, I'll do two quick things. I think transportation, I'll leave to the second. The first thing I'll do is look at the built form. We like the way Brattleboro looks now. One of the things that we like about it is that it does have a compact form. It's got a historically intact downtown, and it's got a building stock that is compact in terms of it's a lot of 2- and 3-story dwellings, and they're on small lots and they're close together, and there's a compact neighborhood around the downtown. What we also know is that it's extremely old. It's in a really fairly average to poor quality, a large amount of it. A lot of it is rented, and a lot of it is incredibly inefficient from an energy standpoint. So, that's precisely where I think it's really important to actually focus on where we really are, and this is not Colorado. It's not sunny. It's not new. We don't have building codes. We can't impose building codes on people. We've got an energy code. That doesn't really play into existing stock. There's a whole lot of barriers that we could identify and deal with, see them as barriers. We could also see them as opportunities. And I think that framing this chapter, I think what I'm getting at is trying to actually come up with a series of measures, targets if you want, that the Planning Commission can follow over a period of 5 years. I wouldn't say that the way I framed it was that we would spend 5 years developing targets, but it was like, we need to get targets, okay? So there's an Energy Committee and there's a Planning Commission and there's data available. It could be, more than a year, I think, reasonably, before you come up with meaningful targets. Then that's the role of is that the role of the Energy Committee to implement, to state those targets in their plan, and then work with the Planning Commission so that come 2016, we're reviewing their progress on their targets and whatever kind of commitments we made in this chapter in 2011. But there are real physical features, particularly with the built form, that at the very least present as challenges. they give us some things because of pretty compact. People can walk around and actually bicycle riding is a bit tricky because it's hilly, but people can walk around, people can walk from school to work and, and those kinds of things. So you get some benefits in transportation, but you might lose it because the house that people are living in is incredibly inefficient and got an oil furnace in the basement.
Well,
So,
inefficient housing is also an opportunity, though.
right,
That's right.
exactly,
That's
which is,
right.
right,
Has made huge,
right.
huge investments in weatherization, and for
That's
instance,
right.
we put all the Reggie money toward efficiency, the regional greenhouse gas initiative,
Right.
all the forward capacity money that we have from ISO New England, because we're so efficient, we're getting credit for that. No other state has managed that conversation and gotten credit for it. And all that money in other states is being given back to the utilities. In our state, we made it, it has to go to the people, and it has to be used for energy efficiency, weatherization, and any other thing that's related to that.
Right.
So we, as a state, are making huge progress.
That's
And I
right.
think, you know, I think making, that's hopeful.
Yeah, I think it is helpful. So what I'd say is fairly modest targets, well-researched and well-presented, that are achievable, that also acknowledge the challenges that we face, including the building stock age and condition and a variety of other factors. I think transportation is deeply challenging. And I'd say, so for instance, even if we all did, say, randomly just decide that we were going to drive 3 days a week instead of 7 days a week and walk or ride a bicycle for the other 4 days a week. If the pattern of usage for trucks and people using 91 doesn't change significantly, you wouldn't see any difference in CO2 emissions or energy consumption in Brattleboro at all right? Because we had just such a tiny blip.
But people would see that measurable in their own personal lives, and we would feel it as a town.
Right,
And that's a different
right.
thing. And I think, like, when you look on the purple sheet here, when I go to the fourth goal, inspire and motivate citizens in town government to be more aware and committed to energy efficiency and energy independence, those are the kind of things, you know, those catchy little jargony things that Gary's talking about, but, you know, and things that Paul has done many times over the year. There's people who have had done all kinds of energy things, and we have all kinds of awareness things that happen, people doing little steps in their house, and so that money has come back to us, and I think we just, I mean, I like that goal. I think we need to encourage more of that, and then the specifics can come after that, and the measurables, I don't know about those baselines because it's all very complex, but I think if we had a campaign, as you've been already doing, around this, it's exciting. It's an opportunity. It doesn't have to be a problem, or, I mean, you can take a barrier and turn it around. And if I got anything from the Michael Schumann presentation, it was that yes, we all have tons of barriers. We have no growth. We have, you know, we're going to lose more jobs whenever Vermont Yankee closes, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. But let's look at what opportunity lies within that, and have actions to be taken that work on those opportunities, rather than seeing it as a down.
I just want to throw a real wrench into this.
Oh, good.
Because it's so smooth. It's been so smooth so far.
I'm so sorry, but I'm just wondering if we really ought to get the transportation aspects out of this section and just deal with electricity.
And put
Well,
transportation in
and
transportation.
And
heating
oil, I
and
mean-
heating and cooling,
Yes, heating and cooling.
built environment energy.
Yep, and get transportation out of here, and put it somewhere else. I mean, there are state targets for reduction of CO2 emissions.
There is a transportation section in the
I
plan.
don't
There
know,
is,
it's just-
the problem, the reason it's typically addressed in an energy section, because it's an energy use, but also the statute's pretty clear that the energy plan has to contain
Yes,
a discussion of
okay.
energy,
yes.
of transportation.
Let's make two.
Oh, the old
We could
statutes.
probably get around it, but
Right.
We've got
Might
about
see
10 minutes
transportation
left
check.
in this discussion tonight. This is not the end, obviously. But I would like to go back to first the principal statement, what we value,
Yeah,
and the vision statement.
we're good.
And it looks like in those two things, the Energy Committee, for the most part, agrees with what has been written.
You did have one addition there in the value statement.
Yeah, and efficiency,
Yeah.
I have a comment.
okay?
That came from TCRA, the values.
I think we just need to state that it's a goal, that we want to be resilient to energy shocks, because right now we're as tied to them as any other community.
Well, this statement is not what is, but what we want to see.
Yeah, actually, so the vision statement is supposed, it's a little narrative trick. So the vision statement is from 2030.
So you
effectively.
you went to sleep
In
and you woke
2030.
up, and
So-
this is what you described in
So this is the
2030.
Rip Van Winkle version.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
this
vision
is,
is where you want to
It's
be.
where you want to be.
Okay.
It's what it would be nice to see.
yeah, I'm challenged the same way you are a little bit. I mean,
Well,
reading
so,
it in the
so
current-
as
current.
far as the value statement at the beginning,
yeah, I don't.
you guys would like to see it say energy conservation and efficiency,
Yes.
and the expanded use of renewable energy as a means to save money and
I don't have any
protect the
trouble with that.
environment.
We like the statement, we just wanted to add energy efficiency, add efficiency.
It's good by me.
I would flag, just to sort of back up what Liz was saying, I'm increasingly troubled just by the little trick that we're playing with the vision statement. I would prefer it saying, opening with something like in 2030, or making it really clear that we're dealing with some kind of
But are
temporal.
any of the other, are we doing that with the other chapters
No, I'm
too?
suggesting that we should do it with all of them. It's increasingly grating on me that it's just a little weird.
Well, at the
I didn't even
beginning
know.
of the plan, though, will we not define what these things are?
Yeah.
But that assumes that they're going to read.
Well,
Yeah,
But
I
you could
just,
just do
yeah.
something simple by saying 2030 vision statement.
yeah, yeah, I know, yeah.
Vision statement for the future.
That's
No
in
Well-
context.
But I just wanted to flag it as
Vision
something that we'll come
statement
back
for
to.
the
I
future.
really do.
Well, it's a 20-year thing. That's what the,
Yeah.
that's what the deal is. So,
Right.
yeah, we can say it every place that it appears if we want, you know, I mean,
Yeah, it's all right.
so,
Couldn't you just call it a 30-year goal?
Yeah.
No, it's a vision, not a goal.
Well, it's a 20-year goal, but yeah, right. Yeah,
Sorry, 20.
yeah.
I think vision
I
25.
would just add that the purpose of any kind of vision statement or a vision is a framing piece.
That's right.
It's what frames what comes next and what your goal is. So if you don't have a vision for where you want to be at some point in time, it's very hard to create the environment to get to that place. So however that's
Yeah, I don't have
that
a,
statement is there shouldn't diminish the fact that this is.
that's
you know,
not my
this is
issue,
where
yeah.
we wanna go.
It's not my issue. It's more just sort of it's it's a way of reading the plan. It's just a certain thing that's not, I'm not all entirely comfortable with the way it's framed. Not as I think it's important to have a vision statement. It's just grammatically I'm a little troubled by it.
so anybody that picks this up,
Yeah,
the town plan, and
Yeah, I
reads
just-
through it
there's-
and comes to a chapter and they read this vision statement, they might go,
huh?
these people are crazy, that's
Right.
not the way this is.
Right, right.
Like
Which
me.
I remember picking the state one up and
Right.
reading it and going,
Please
huh?
redefine what
Yeah.
it is.
Right, that's all I'm getting at. I'm just a little
Okay,
hesitant
fine.
about it. That's all.
So how about the vision itself?
I think it's fine.
I think we liked it.
Yeah.
We didn't change it.
There's a couple places where it says will, and it should just be contributes, I think.
Right.
and-
Yeah, we
But
just have to watch the verb.
but that's all, I
verbs.
think.
We considered those just grammar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are a community resilient to external shocks. Staying open. Great.
So can we start out by, we agree with the value statements and the vision statements?
And then goals comes next.
Well, trends comes next. That's the next thing?
Yep.
Yeah, but is that how we did it in each chapter?
Yeah.
Trends, so
Yeah.
trends comes before goals?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So those trends, I see
I-
that.
I think
I'm troubled by the last one that was
Yeah.
added. It doesn't make much sense to me. And I feel that something can be worked out of it that goes into conditions. I'm not really,
Are you on the white paper or the?
on the
On the
lavender,
lavender.
the very last bullet point.
so it's energy efficiency programs.
Oh, okay.
Right. I had the same issues. It's not
I'm not really clear. what-
It's not an observation of a trend. It would be my first reaction. I think it might be better moved to current conditions.
I think it probably has
Oh.
something important to say. I'm not really sure what it is yet.
Well, here we go, difference between trends and current conditions.
And I think the trend, if we can get some information on like the number of businesses that Efficiency Vermont has worked with, you know, from this year to this year, and we can see it's growing and
Right.
see what they're, yeah, I mean, I know my husband's company has it, so it's like,
So do you want me to get those
Yeah.
numbers?
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
stuff we're looking for from the beginning.
and then I can work with Paul to understand the rest of it.
I can tell you an area that I'm troubled by in the lavender edition as well is, I think we really need to fact check the second bullet.
The one that's
Total energy
the one that's crossed out, or the one that's which one?
Uh,
The one that you proposed to delete, or
We had combined the first two
Oh,
bullets
Yes.
because some of the information was
yeah,
the same.
the second one is somewhat redundant.
Okay, so in the edited
Oh, I see.
version.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
The
it's the
second
same.
one, I'm not comfortable with those numbers, and population increase, I don't know where that's from, we just did a census.
Yep.
So we might be able to update that.
That's about it, actually. I think it might have been 8.2 or something.
Oh, it's close enough?
It was really pretty close.
No problem. And then also,
That's 2020.
I think we need to fact check the first bullet too, which is about increases and a lot of percentages. There is going to be an updated version of the current energy plan. The commissioner told me that she was going to have that ready by the end of this month. And then I think I told you before, Gary, that there's going to be a brand-new comprehensive energy plan available in October, which isn't going to serve us.
Uh-huh.
But it's certainly, an updated version will certainly give us better numbers.
So you think that those numbers in the updated plan would change, the ones that measure energy use increasing between 1990 and 2005? You think that would actually change?
I think they could, yeah.
By much?
Well, it's flat. The amount of energy that we're using is flat over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I know, but that,
Between 90 and
but
2000.
but if you do, if you, it's a 15-year period.
Yeah.
Uh,
So-
Sarah, are you saying
So
you
it's
could
an
change
annual.
that to
It's not a very.
1990
It's not a
to
very significant
2010,
annual
or-
increase,
I don't know, I just.
right? I mean, that's like a
fact-check
1
the
point,
current information.
I don't know, something or other increase per year,
Yeah.
which is hardly alarming.
But
Right.
just, Sarah, are you saying that that could be updated to 2010 or?
Yeah,
or-
it might be different. I'm
Because
just-
the numbers from them won't change.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I would be surprised if they go back and revise numbers from 1990 to 2005.
You're probably right, but.
If they go from
It's gonna be at the end of
2005 to
this
2010, then I would, you might see a slightly different, the line might take a slightly different shape, but I don't think it'd be huge.
Well, do you want me to send you that
Sure.
version when it comes out?
That'd be great.
I think the point of the last bullet was to point out that Vermont is making progress in reducing energy demand. I mean, we've said that Vermont has growing energy demand, but Efficiency Vermont is being successful at reducing energy demand.
Well, hang on, no, it's been, this is where it goes back to the debate. What it's been good at is reducing the rate of growth in demand. It's not that demand is, it hasn't reversed or even zeroed out demand. It's a huge contribution. Its contribution has been that it's slowed the rate of growth, right? Which is important.
While keeping productivity and style of living.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily jump to a conclusion about that, actually, because I think that one of the problems that we've got with this data, particularly at the level of the town, so if you look at that chart that you were working on before, the people from CVPS that I talked to when I asked them for an explanation of the change between 2005 and 2009 on residential use and why residential use change was less than, wasn't huge, and that commercial use change was not that huge, was their entire explanation was that for commercial and industrial use they've observed a massive drop in second and third shift activity, and that some of the improvements that you might have thought was going to happen in residential consumption actually isn't as good as you might have thought because there's more people staying at home. So their explanation was completely free of discussion of the use of Energy Star programs, more efficient buildings, or any other kind of efficiency-driven measure. Theirs was entirely on, you know what, the level of activity here is just less than it was 5 years ago. That's it. So, you know, so if you're going to make an argument that it's improved efficiency or improved conservation, then you're going to have to do better than that, in my sense,
Right.
with the numbers.
So
Right.
we talked for a second there about the trend about Efficiency Vermont being having statistics in there rather than having this as a trend. Is that what we're going to do?
On the slowing the rate of growth? I mean, I think the one...
No. The trend being that Efficiency Vermont has worked with this many entities
Okay.
and so forth, right? So were you going to get together?
Yeah, I mean,
All about that?
yeah.
Yeah.
I would pick up on Sarah's point. If the state through Efficiency Vermont is able to get some kind of a rebate or refund from ISO New England, because what Vermont is able to demonstrate is that added electricity production. So if you, let me try and
It's the forward capacity market.
Right, exactly. So what they're able to communicate to ISO is that the likelihood of having to build a new power station is pushed off
Right.
some period of years because the state of Vermont has been able to slow down its rate of increase in electricity consumption. And so the ISO New England can turn that into a bunch of different things, including changing their investment, changing their profile for when they're going to have to buy energy on the spot market and the long-term market and a whole bunch of things. So you'd get that in the form of almost like a rebate back to the state because you're relieving them of the need to increase capacity, either by buying it into the region or by adding regional electricity production.
They consider it a payment.
Right.
Just like they do, we say we're gonna add on to a power plant.
Right.
We get paid for that to guarantee future supply. And we're guaranteeing future supply through energy efficiency.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a real number,
It's a
and it's
real
something
number.
that really happens.
So if that's a trend, that's different. So for instance, if we go back to the original plan, which was written in 2004, that couldn't possibly have been true because Efficiency Vermont didn't exist. So if we can get at that number, including what the deal between ISO New England and the state is, then that's a real trend.
I can get that number.
Right.
Okay, so
That would be
we'll
great.
put that in
Yep.
there as the trend.
Yep, that'd be good.
That's good. You're giving me lots of this here, and I'm gonna.
Sorry, Sarah.
My daughter is moving to Missoula, Montana tomorrow. and they're waiting for me.
Wow.
Oh, so she's not
Wow.
going to do that for you tonight? Is that what you're saying?
Is she going to be a dental floss tycoon?
Dental floss.
Moving to Montana soon. Come on. Am I the only, well, whatever.
Apparently.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, Sarah.
Lost me.
Okay, good luck.
Thanks.
Good luck with the
Thank you, Mayor,
move.
for coming.
I'm sending you a huge packet.
Great, good, thank you.
Say hi to Giz for me.
So, gonna have to,
Move
say
along
goodnight to
here.
the energy chapter. Thanks for the discussion, and thanks for bringing all this information and being so thoughtful about, analyzing the chapter as written. And I'm not even gonna guess how many more times we'll talk about this, but, it'll be less than 10.
Hey Gary, is it a good idea at this point to bring up, this is a pretty complicated chapter, as you now are all really clear. We have a very light mention of the current circumstances of Vermont Yankee, but that's unfolding pretty much as we speak. I think by the time the plan goes to the select board, we may need to revise how much we say and what we say. And I think that all the commissioners need to start thinking about exactly what would be appropriate under those circumstances. And then the next thing I'd say is, given the complexity of this chapter, is this worth having, say, some commissioners meet with some members of the Energy Committee and us
I
to...
think definitely, because
All right.
there's no sense in sitting in this setting
It's
and trying
tough.
to hammer out some of this wording and stuff
Right.
like that, you know.
Right.
And then I think the other question is, it's sort of similar to what Liz asked. I'm assuming, I've been assuming right along that the energy plan and the energy chapter of the town plan should be essentially, they should agree. They shouldn't be at odds. And so I think that's a reason for sitting down, with some commissioners, some committee members, some staff, and trying to work it out so that we can come to a consensus. I assume that that's the right assumption. Yeah, not to use a double positive, but.
Okay, so do we have volunteers from the commission as to... Okay, Jim, that's great, thank you. Carolina, okay,
I'd
that's
like a
good.
TPAC member to be part of that, whether it's Maggie or not, I don't know, but there are other TPAC people that have been sending in
Thank you, Sarah.
comments.
So there can really
All right,
just
I'm
be
going to give you
two
emails, I'm going to try and figure
commissioners.
something out.
Okay,
Great,
oh,
thank
that's right.
Yeah.
Good luck
Otherwise-
tonight.
Town Plan Advisory.
Well, we can warn, if there's
Yep.
more than two, we can warn it.
Maggie
It's
can
not-
tell you all about it.
Right, we're not, the warning, we can figure out the warning stuff, so, okay,
It's not
so
a
we've
big
got...
deal, we just have
Yeah,
to warn
so
it.
Maggie, did you volunteer, or were you dragged into it?
Well,
Sorry, I wasn't meaning to volunteer you, but I just thought.
I'm sorry, and Liz, was there...
sure.
Okay, cool, all right, that's great.
So we'll it'll just mean we have to warn the meetings, that's all.
That's all right, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay,
All right, well, that
Good.
sounds good.
excellent, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. All right. And you guys don't have to leave. Would you like to stick around for municipal facilities?
Oh, actually,
And
it's
even more
not free of
engaging.
your consent.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, really.
Did I say you had
Thanks, Kathleen.
Okay.
Thank you, you guys.
Okay, see you later, Paul.
Right.
Just an outline.
Okay, so that is the next thing for us. Where's my... So Sue, would you like to speak to this one?
I don't mind.
Is that the wrong way to ask you that?
I'm trying to, well, we haven't worked through goals and objectives and actions yet, but I think if living in the real world, the trends are pretty interesting for this. It's basically pointing to, at least right now, and we don't know how it'll go, but there's definitely been a shift in the tax base. So the burden is increasingly on residential rather than commercial industrial. Obviously, we have an aging population, so there's a lot more smaller households.
But they'll use less energy. I just want to say that.
And then, obviously, we have some infrastructure needs.
Shorter shower.
So I think the context for this chapter, in my mind, really needs to be, what can we do, what's the bang for the buck, where, you know, limited resources, and also trying to get the town on getting the town plan and the capital improvement plan kind of matched up so that we're making, we're keeping that in mind.
And I'll speak to that last point really quickly because it's going to come up for you on Saturday. The town is pretty close to the upper limit for its bonding ability, and that's currently dominated by the wastewater treatment plant, which doesn't actually retire, the debt there doesn't retire for a significant number of years. It gets smaller over time, so there's a little more headroom as you go forward. It does also assume a 6% rate increase or 12% rate increase for every ratepayer, for every utility ratepayer in the municipality for the next, however, you know, for a long time.
For water and sewer.
For water and sewer.
Yeah.
And so that's going to have a downward impact on tourism and business and residential use for the foreseeable future.
It's a catch-22. As we conserve more, we pay more.
Yep. You'll certainly be paying more per unit if they're trying to capture the same amount of revenue to pay the bond. So I don't know how Brattleboro compares unit price to other municipalities in the region or in the state. I don't know what's going to happen to those figures long term. So that's one issue. The next issue is that we've got identified unfunded liabilities that are significant to do with emergency service personnel, a long-standing agreement there, which is again consistent with state and national conditions. And then lastly, the bond market, the municipal bond market currently is showing some, you know, there's evidence of anxiety to do with the straitened economic circumstances of states and municipalities, so that the cost of borrowing through bonds is actually going up, and the ability for municipalities to access that market is getting more difficult. So
right.
the scenario I'm drawing here is that we have a really, really, really limited capital budget.
So the several things that you just mentioned, would those go into current conditions, would you say?
Trends and current,
Trends.
split between trends and current conditions.
So we should include those.
Yep.
In there.
Yep.
And, you know, that unfunded, you know, the
Yeah.
liabilities is a huge number from at least.
Yeah, to put it in context,
Conceivably.
we're making a $38,000 per year contribution to a fund that requires $400,000 annual contribution.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
How long has that been happening?
Years.
More than a decade?
I wouldn't want to say, but a long time.
What fund is this?
It's the fund that pays for healthcare for police and fire personnel
In retirement.
in retirement.
Oh, that's what we were talking about at the informational meetings.
Right.
It's separate from teachers?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good question to raise, because in fact, what we're just talking about here is the municipal capital budget and plan, and that doesn't take into account at all any capital commitments that the school system is planning on making or needs to make. So we're you know, Gary's probably better able to answer this than I am, but I think we're still paying for the high school a lot.
Yeah.
We really enjoy it a lot.
The high school.
The high school, yes. A lot
And
of it's
middle
yours.
school and
the
career
middle
center.
school.
I
And the
never
career
went.
center.
My year was the last year in the old building, so I never got to enjoy the fruits of that.
Okay, there you go.
I will be paying for it.
You will be,
Very
yes, it's very nice. You should go for a visit. What I'd say there is that, yeah, this is actually a narrow slice. So if you look at the total capital controlled by the school district in Brattleboro, it's much, you know, there's a lot of fixed capital. There's a lot of buildings that they're responsible for. This doesn't reflect the capital environment for them at all, but residents, tax-paying residents of Brattleboro have to take both into account because they pay both taxes.
Is there a reason that the liabilities were created? Why the funding stopped at being at the levels it was supposed to be? I mean, was it like a one-year thing that just kept going?
Well, if you listen to the news, that's what the news is about everywhere. It's not any different from the whole discussion in Wisconsin.
I think at some point, decision makers, elected decision makers and officials, appointed officials and employed professionals have been saying we should really do something about that. And it's been going on for a really long time, and the time to do something about it has kind of arrived, and people are now shocked to realize what the gap is. But one way of thinking it through is that, for instance, if we were making those kinds of commitments all the way along, a whole lot of things that we did do we wouldn't have done because we would have been paying that fund.
And that's essentially what the finance director said the other night at the meeting. He said, well, there's this and there's that, we could have been doing this.
Yeah.
Had we been doing this, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And I mean, and I think a big problem is that as a town, we never made that decision, and we didn't really talk about it.
Right.
And so it's, I think what we're getting now is a peek at the issue,
Right.
and it's a scary thing to look at.
So what I think it means for the town plan is that we need to be realistic and find those little bang for your buck, things that can improve quality of life here, but not,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
not
We should-
overextend
I
what.
think we should talk about, I think this is good to have these trends and conditions in here so that anybody that does pick this up says, oh, what?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the things are pretty obvious, but a lot of the discomfort that people should be feeling, they're not really, because they
Right.
don't have the specifics about some of this stuff.
Well, even if we were to go back to some of the questions that Liz raised earlier on, or that have come up with reference to the other chapters that we've discussed. So if you want to sort of gauge how open the town plan should be to development, or how much of a commitment the town plan should make to increasing the population or changing the profile of the population or a bunch of other things, this chapter or these trends should be really something that we remember or read again when we're thinking about those kinds of things. I think that the revenue picture as well as the capital picture are both alarming. I think our revenue is flat or shrinking, which is consistent with an aging and largely unchanged population. So, the obvious long-term things that we can affect are, if we increase the population and we increase the average wealth of the population, then there's more people and more income held by those people to share the burden of paying the capital fund and paying into revenue. And I don't think the last town plan addressed that issue at all, and it was already present in 2004. And I think it's absolutely crucial that this town plan addresses head-on the consequences of staying at this level of population, given what we know are the existing obligations that we're inheriting, which are significant.
And particularly since some of our municipal facilities now have quite a, there's a big gap between the capacity
Mhm.
and the use.
Yes.
For instance, the water and the sewage treatment, sewage treatment plant's gonna have all kinds of capacity that isn't gonna be being used, and we've paid for that. Or
Right.
we will, we haven't paid for it yet, but we will pay for it, and, things like the couple of companies that have started that are gonna use a lot, and do use a lot of water and sewage, are examples of something that could happen that would take us closer to using the facilities to capacity,
Right.
But then we have to be careful
We have
to
to-
not go past capacity. So,
Just enough.
yeah,
Right.
so it's a tricky thing, but we're always on the other side of that.
Right.
We're not encroaching on that
Right.
yet, so.
Right.
So you want to be developing area industries that would be using that capacity?
Maybe, or at least acknowledge that we have the capacity, and those are the sorts of companies that might
Right.
be welcome. You know? And things like particular areas of town have a lot of infrastructure available that isn't being used.
It's not built out, right?
You know, but then, on the other hand, if we build more roads, is that a
That's
use of-
that's a new liability.
That's a
That's
new
right.
liability,
Right.
right, so
It's not an asset.
it's really,
Are there more residential areas that can be brought into the water and sewer?
there are more places where there could be residential areas that are close to water and sewer.
Are we done talking about zoning, or are we gonna come back to that?
We haven't even started. Were you feeling good?
No, no, the very first week I was here, we talked about infill, and I wasn't educated.
Oh, all right. You're just waiting.
Educated
You're
enough
just
yet to
itching.
speak
You're
for
itching.
Now you're
myself.
edgy.
You're itching for another chance. All right. Okay. You want to talk about infill again?
No, not right
No.
now. I only got 7 minutes.
To answer your question, we can talk about. There are some neighborhoods that are not, that don't access the sewer and wastewater treatment plant, but have potable water delivered, I think, and then, or is it an exact match?
Pretty close to it.
It's pretty close to an exact match. Okay, and so there are some neighborhoods that are not accessing it, and to connect them, it would be a major capital investment, substantial.
But there's not a lot, I mean.
It's
it
not a
would
lot
be
left out.
Interesting to know how many, I mean, we're in the middle of a neighborhood that has water and sewer from the town, but we don't. I think we're the only house on the road that doesn't.
Well, to use
What do
you
you
as
know?
an example.
We should put you on, Gary.
Do you have to pay for that?
Yes.
And so it's your choice at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We would have to blast through a whole bunch of ledge, that's the,
Yeah.
you know.
Some people have school choice, we have sewer choice.
But it would be interesting to know, I don't know how many people are in a similar situation, you know. I mean, what percentage of the residences in town don't have either town
Yeah.
water or town sewer.
Right.
Um,
I'm thinking at the
Sounds
level of a
pretty small.
neighborhood, and I guess there's an issue around the Austin School, and I don't know how far up, for instance, I don't know how far up Guilford Street the system goes.
Right.
Is that,
And at one time, that area was maybe gonna connect to Delta, you
Yep.
know, connections.
Right.
there, but,
That's right.
yeah,
and so
right.
forth, but they're sort of anomalies, you know,
Right.
just a few percent
There's-
probably, or
there's-
something.
I'd say the majority of both commercial and residential stuff in town is on. I think
And the ones that aren't have a good reason not to.
apparently.
Yeah, geographic, topographic, you know.
Apparently.
uh,
I think it's worth the
sensibilities, you know.
All right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think I probably, my intention wasn't necessarily to scare you, but it was to actually really sober you up with the seriousness of the setting. And the context for the last town meeting and this one and town meetings going forward will be, what kind of services do you want to cut so that we can keep this thing going? Because the level of revenues and our capital commitments don't allow us to maintain the same. You know, we have to cut, the level of service is something that is not necessarily sustainable.
Or figure out how to raise revenues.
Right, and so the medium to long-term solution for revenue raising is to make the town as attractive as possible so that people don't want to leave. Maybe people would like to come, and that we don't totally, what's the word that you can say in public? Take all their money when they do come. So, fleece, I think I was trying, yeah, right. I was having a hard time with that one. And then, so growing the
At least
population.
people that come here for 150 years.
That's right.
It's been working, yeah. So that's the economic growth model? That's the economic development model? All right, okay, so.
The one that hasn't worked in the past.
That's right. So growing the population and growing it in a way that means that, I guess, younger families are the kind of key, you know, the key change, because we're aging, might be what we end up focusing our energy on in other parts of the plan. Yeah. Does that make sense?
And Mr. Chairman, just a note.
Yeah, we're up
Yeah, we
against it.
got, that says 3 minutes. My watch
Yep.
doesn't say that, but we'll go with the 3 minutes.
What's yours say?
Can I ask a very quick question?
Yes.
Is there potential for raising revenue for the services Brattleboro municipal departments provide to the outer town? I'm thinking of fire and police, but maybe also through the school. If it's a much more complex question, then we should get into it this time. I'll withdraw
yeah.
that.
Well, the school does do that already. That's in,
Right.
Yeah. We have emergency
Water and
services
sewer.
has a mutual aid agreement, so when
Yeah.
when fire or police help Guilford, or whatever we say, hypothetically, then sooner or later, you know, Guilford's going to help out Brattleboro. And there is actually a fairly sophisticated accounting mechanism for hours of time and gasoline and diesel use and all that kind of stuff. So it goes backwards and forwards, but at the end of the year, things pretty much level up. So,
Fair
yeah.
enough.
So, Sue, have you gotten enough from our shock faces and so forth about municipal facilities?
Sure.
Yeah?
Enough for tonight.
Some input?
Okay, good.
Okay.
So I think we got,
If you find that we're missing something, shoot me the email, please.
yeah,
You know, under the current conditions, if you find that there's something that you think that I should be addressing.
we'll continue to fill that out, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Ready? I move to adjourn. You ready for that?
Second.
so our next meeting is March 28th. Everybody knows what we're going to be talking about, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Goodbye.
Good night, everyone.